Hello and welcome to today's deep dive into a story that's gripping the nation, a narrative interwoven with profound grief and the sharp edges of political discourse. We're examining the complex situations surrounding Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, and Patty Morin, a mother whose world has been shattered by an unspeakable tragedy. This story unfolds against the backdrop of the Trump administration's staunch stance on immigration, a policy that has consistently sparked fervent debate and intense scrutiny. The Trump administration's approach to immigration has been characterized by a focus on stringent enforcement and deportation, a policy that has drawn considerable criticism from human rights organizations, civil liberties groups, and political opponents. The accusations levied against the administration include claims of excessive force, disregard for due process, and the targeting of vulnerable populations. These criticisms have painted a picture of an administration willing to prioritize security concerns above all else, often at the perceived expense of individual rights. Into this highly charged political climate, the brutal murder of Rachel Morin, a Maryland mother, injected a raw and deeply personal element. The circumstances of her death, a violent crime allegedly committed by an illegal immigrant with ties to the notorious MS-13 gang, quickly became a focal point for those advocating for stricter immigration policies. The tragedy became a stark, visceral example of the potential consequences of what they perceive as inadequate border security and lax immigration enforcement. The emotional weight of this crime, combined with the pre-existing political tensions, created a volatile situation. The stage was set. A horrific crime, a grieving mother, and a political battleground. Karoline Leavitt, recognizing the potential impact of this narrative, decided to bring Patty Morin into the White House briefing room, a space typically reserved for political sparring and policy announcements. This move signaled a deliberate attempt to humanize the immigration debate and to use the raw emotion of a victim's family to underscore the administration's position. This decision, however, was not without its critics, who questioned the ethics of using such a personal tragedy for political purposes. The introduction of Patty Morin into the White House briefing room was a calculated move, one that sought to redefine the narrative surrounding immigration and to place the issue firmly within the context of public safety and national security. The White House briefing room, a space where political narratives are meticulously crafted and disseminated, became the stage for an intensely emotional and highly charged event. Karoline Leavitt introduced Patty Morin as a special guest, a move that immediately signaled the departure from the typical briefing format. What followed was a deeply moving and heart-wrenching account of Rachel Morin's murder, delivered by her mother, Patty Morin, with raw and unfiltered emotion. Patty Morin's testimony was not merely a recitation of facts, it was a visceral outpouring of grief and a stark portrayal of the devastating consequences of violent crime. She spoke of the brutality of her daughter's murder, detailing the graphic details that were so disturbing that court officials deemed it necessary to seal crime scene and autopsy photos. The emotional weight of her words filled the room, creating an atmosphere of palpable sorrow and anger. The White House's strategic intent behind this move was clear: to use Patty Morin's story to underscore the dangers they perceive as being associated with illegal immigration. By placing a human face on the issue, they sought to shift the narrative from abstract policy debates to the concrete realities of crime and victimhood. Leavitt used the briefing as a platform to directly challenge critics of the Trump administration's deportation policies, accusing them of being insensitive to the suffering of victims and their families. She directly attacked Senator Van Hollen and various news outlets. The immediate impact of the briefing was profound. The emotional resonance of Patty Morin's testimony resonated deeply with many viewers who were moved by her raw grief and the stark portrayal of her loss. Supporters of stricter immigration policies praised Leavitt for her boldness in giving Patty Morin a platform to share her story, arguing that it served as a powerful reminder of the very real dangers posed by illegal immigration and violent criminals. However, critics immediately accused the White House of exploiting a mother's grief for political gain. They argued that it was inappropriate and insensitive to use such a tragic event to advance a political agenda. The debate quickly escalated, with accusations of political opportunism flying from both sides. The briefing became a flashpoint, igniting a national conversation about the ethics of using victims' stories in political discourse and the potential for such tactics to further polarize an already divided nation. The White House briefing, featuring Patty Morin's emotional testimony, ignited a firestorm of political reactions and media scrutiny. Supporters of the Trump administration's immigration policies lauded Karoline Leavitt's decision to bring Patty Morin into the briefing room. viewing it as a powerful and necessary move to highlight the human cost of what they perceive as lax immigration enforcement. They argued that the emotional impact of Patty Morin's story served as a stark reminder of the very real dangers posed by illegal immigration and violent criminals. However, critics of the administration's policies condemned the move as a blatant attempt to exploit a mother's grief for political gain. They accused the White House of being insensitive and opportunistic, arguing that it was inappropriate to use such a tragic event to advance a political agenda. Senator Van Hollen, who was directly criticized by Leavitt during the briefing, defended his actions, stating that his concern was with ensuring due process and addressing potential errors in the deportation process. He accused the White House of using a tragedy to deflect from legitimate concerns about the administration's immigration policies. The media coverage of the briefing was equally polarized. Some news outlets focused on the emotional impact of Patty Morin's testimony, highlighting her raw grief and the devastating consequences of her daughter's murder. Others scrutinized the White House's political strategy, questioning the ethics of using such a personal tragedy for political purposes. Political commentators and pundits weighed in from all sides, adding to the cacophony of voices and opinions. Social media platforms became a battleground, with hashtags and trending topics reflecting the polarized opinions of the American public. The debate quickly escalated, with accusations of political opportunism and insensitivity flying from all sides. The White House briefing, intended to shift the narrative surrounding immigration, instead became a flashpoint for a broader national conversation about the ethics of using victims' stories in political discourse and the potential for such tactics to further polarize an already divided nation. The incident also highlighted the growing role of social media in shaping public opinion and amplifying political debates. At the core of the controversy surrounding Karoline Leavitt and Patty Morin lies the ongoing debate about deportations. The Trump administration's stance has been that swift and decisive action is necessary to protect American citizens from dangerous criminals. They argue that any delay or leniency puts lives at risk, citing cases like that of Rachel Morin's murder as evidence of the potential consequences of inadequate border security and lax immigration enforcement. Critics, however, raise serious concerns about due process and the potential for errors in the deportation process. They point to cases where individuals have been wrongly deported, highlighting the human cost of such mistakes. They argue that a more measured and careful approach is needed, one that balances security concerns with the protection of individual rights. The case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man deported to El Salvador, has become a focus of this debate, showing how the system is not perfect. The White House's decision to highlight Rachel Morin's murder in the context of this deportation debate has further inflamed tensions. It has transformed a complex policy issue into a deeply emotional and personal one, placing the spotlight on the human cost of both crime and deportation. The question of whether the two issues are directly linked or whether the White House is using a tragedy for political gain continues to be a source of heated debate. The debate over deportations is not merely an abstract policy discussion, it has real-world consequences for individuals and families. The potential for errors in the system, the separation of families, and the human cost of deportation are all factors that must be considered. The White House's decision to use Rachel Morin's murder to underscore their position has brought these issues into sharp focus, forcing Americans to confront the complex and often painful realities of immigration enforcement. The emotional weight of Patty Morin's testimony has added a new dimension to this debate, highlighting the human cost of both crime and the policies designed to prevent it. This has created a situation where policy and tragedy are deeply entwined. The events surrounding Karoline Leavitt and Patty Morin have far-reaching implications for American politics, highlighting the deep divisions within the country on the issue of immigration. They also underscore the power of emotional narratives in shaping public opinion and influencing political discourse. The use of victim stories in political rhetoric is not a new phenomenon, but this case has brought it into sharp focus, raising critical questions about the ethics of such tactics and their potential to further polarize an already divided nation. The ethical considerations surrounding the use of victim stories in political discourse are complex and multifaceted. On one hand, such stories can serve as powerful reminders of the human cost of policy decisions, bringing abstract debates into sharp focus. On the other hand, there is a risk of exploiting personal tragedies for political gain, potentially undermining the dignity of victims and their families. The potential for such tactics to further polarize an already divided nation is also a significant concern. Looking ahead, this story is likely to continue to play out in the media and in the political arena. The immigration debate remains a central issue in American politics, and the events surrounding Rachel Morin's murder have added a new and highly charged dimension to the conversation. As the 2024 election cycle continues, it is extremely likely that this event and the conversations surrounding it will continue to be a talking point for many political figures. The long-term implications of this incident are significant. It has highlighted the power of emotional narratives in shaping public opinion, the ethical considerations surrounding the use of victims' stories in political discourse, and the deep divisions within the country on the issue of immigration. The debate surrounding deportations and the broader issue of immigration enforcement is likely to remain a central focus of American politics for the foreseeable future. The events surrounding Karoline Leavitt and Patty Morin have added a new and highly charged dimension to this debate, ensuring that it remains a key issue in the national conversation. As the political landscape continues to evolve, the lessons learned from this incident will likely shape the way that politicians and the media approach the issue of immigration in the years to come. Thank you for listening, and we will continue to follow the story as it develops.